welcome back to Module 5. In this module, we'll be going over the how questions, or better known as the situational questions. Like I said before, the ones that kind of put you in a difficult moral or safety dilemma. What they want to find out is if you know that you can think on your feet and you know how to handle the situations the right way. But before we get into that, let's recap what we went over in the last module. We went over the what questions. These are the questions where one of the things that they'll want to know more than anything is if you know what the number one goal of the fire department. And again, in case you missed it, the number one goal of the fire department is to protect life and property. Second, they're going to want to know what, if they decide to hire you, what will you contribute to the department? What the fire service doesn't need is more guys that just kind of show up and go through the motions. They want to know that you are a go-getter and someone that doesn't need to be told what to do, and that you want to expand your knowledge and get more training. Finally, the last thing that they want to know with the what questions is, do you understand the principles of the fire department? Things like sacrifice, things like integrity, things like safety. They want to know that you have a good understanding of what you're getting yourself into if they decide to hire you on their department. So what are some things to keep in mind, some principles to keep in mind when preparing yourself for the different types of situational questions you may encounter? First, like I said before, what they'll want to know is they'll put you in different situations and want to know how you respond. There is a right way, and they are looking for you to say particular things. For example, they might put you in some sort of moral or ethical dilemma. Let's say you're on scene and you see a fellow firefighter steal something or take cash out of somebody's wallet. How would you respond? Or maybe they'll put you in some sort of other moral or ethical dilemma where you'll witness something in public, and it may not even be with anybody related to the fire department. They want to see how you respond. What kind of moral and ethical standards do you hold yourself to? Next type of question is maybe some sort of on-scene dilemma. A really common one that people get all the time, we'll be going over this later in the sample questions, is what happens if you're given conflicting orders by two different officers on scene? What do? There's certain principles that you follow, and there's certain things you need to do. And you also need to, and like I said later on, we'll touch on exactly what they want to hear. Next, they want to know that you're able to communicate the right way, especially with the on-scene questions. Communication is huge in the fire service. They call it freelancing for those of you that don't have experience in the fire service already. Freelancing on a fire scene is a big no-no. You cannot be doing that. So communicating with the other firefighters, communicating with the officers, and in situational questions that talk about moral or ethical dilemmas, how do you communicate with other people when there's a disagreement? They're going to probably be putting you in situations like that as well. Finally, with these questions, they always want you to take the high road. Don't ever answer a question by saying you would do something to cover for somebody else if they do something illegal or immoral. As firefighters, we're supposed to hold ourselves to a higher standard, a standard that the public expects of us, and more importantly, that we expect of ourselves. So you always have to be taking the high road when giving your answers to the situational questions. Now, what does the panel want to hear from you? Number one is safety is always the number one priority on a fire scene. And that goes for a fire scene, an EMS scene, a rescue scene. Safety will always be your number one priority. In fact, I heard a story of a guy that once interviewed at one of the departments I used to work at, and he had quite a bit of experience. And when they started putting him in some situational questions, asking him about how he would handle things on scene, he never said a word about safety or scene size up or anything like that. He ended up not getting hired because the officers that were interviewing him felt that he didn't understand the number one principle that safety is king on a fire scene. Next, the panel wants to know that if you're ever asked a question or you're put in a situation where you're not sure exactly what to do or what to say, that you're willing to ask for help. And I get it. As the new guy on a department, the last thing you want to do is come off as incompetent or unsure of yourself. But there's no shame in asking for help. Just keep in mind that if you say that you are unsure of yourself or don't know the answer or aren't sure how to do a particular task, that you will take the initiative to go figure out the right way to get it done. What else does the panel want to hear? Communication and respect through the chain of command is really important. So in that bullet point, I kind of touched on three things. Number one, communication. I already talked about that a little bit. Communication on a fire scene is so important. And communication not on the fire ground, at the firehouse is really important too. Remember, you're going to be living with these people for 24 hours a day. They're going to kind of become like your second family. You're going to be dealing with a lot of different personalities, and sometimes things can get tense. So being able to communicate well with others is really important. Next, respect. Respect is huge in the fire service. Having respect for the citizens, having respect for your fellow firefighters, and especially having respect for your officers. That's so important. Finally, the chain of command. If you have an issue with somebody on your shift or somebody else in the department, the last thing you want to do is immediately run to the chief and talk to him about it. That's why the chain of command is in place. You go to your superior officer. Maybe it's your lieutenant, maybe it's your captain. Every fire department is structured a little bit different, but every fire department does have a particular chain of command. And any sorts of complaints or problems or questions are supposed to follow that chain of command. So the panel wants to know and they want to hear that you understand the aspects of communication, respect, and following the chain of command. Finally, the officers want to know that you'll do the right thing when necessary. Like I said, they'll be putting you in different situations. They want to know that when there's cash on the table or there's an open purse or wallet, that you're not going to be the type of person that will take money because nobody else sees, or that you won't be the type of person that will knowingly put yourself in a situation where you can make yourself look bad, but even more importantly, make the department look bad. Remember, you are the face of the department, so they expect you to hold yourself to a higher standard while you're on and off duty. So let's get into some sample questions. The first and one of the most common situational questions you will get is, how would you deal with conflicting orders at a scene? Now, when they ask you the question, it might have a little more information with it. They might paint a picture of you find yourself on scene at a 2-story residential home, flames showing from here, your lieutenant tells you to do this, captain from another crew shows up and tells you to do something else. How do you handle the situation? Ultimately, what they're getting at is, how would you deal with conflicting orders at a scene? Now, two things they're going to want to know. First and foremost, they want to know that you are going to communicate. You need to effectively let the officers on the panel know that if you are given orders by your lieutenant to do something, and another officer of a higher rank comes and tells you to do something else completely unrelated, you need to communicate with that higher ranking officer. Again, let's use the example of the lieutenant and the captain. You need to tell the captain, whoever, I've been ordered by Lieutenant so-and-so to do this task. Would you like me to let him know or inform him that you are telling me to do something else? Most of the time, the captain will say, no, that's fine, carry on doing whatever it was that you were doing. But what you need to do is you need to communicate. If the captain does say, yes, I want you to stop what you're doing and do this instead, you need to communicate that back to your lieutenant. You need to communicate back to your lieutenant that Captain whoever said, he wants me to do this and this is more important. And let the two officers sort it out. Your job as a new hire or as a new recruit is not to run the command at a fire. Your job is to follow the orders that you're given by your officers. The other principle that they're going to want to know is, you need to know that you have to follow the orders of the highest ranking officer. Like I said, if there's some sort of dispute between the two officers, that's up for them to figure that out, not for you to sort it out. And whatever you do, make sure you communicate with both parties exactly what you will be doing. Next question. How would you deal with an irate citizen? Again, they might paint a little bit more of an elaborate picture of something to the effect of, you're at the store shopping for groceries for the crew, and a citizen comes up to you and starts complaining about a recent tax levy that was passed. How do you respond? So a couple things you want to keep in mind is, first, you have to show respect to the citizens. Even if you completely disagree and they're being very offensive and rude, don't get into a fight with them. Keep your mouth shut, listen to what they have to say, and respect them. Second, it's not your job as the new person on the department to sort out any sort of tax issues or political problems that's going on between the city and the department. What you need to do is you need to refer that citizen or whoever that person is to the appropriate officer. Ma'am, sir, I'm sorry to hear that you feel that way. If you would like to speak with the chief, his office hours are this. Or if you would like, I could put you in contact with my lieutenant. It's not your job to get into a debate or a disagreement with a citizen. That being said, if they draw out the scenario to where this particular person is becoming violent, or you feel as though you are in danger or your safety is being threatened. Again, safety is number one in the fire service. You need to let the officers know that you will find a safe place and get away from this person and notify law enforcement. And the same thing goes with a violent or irate person on the scene, whether it be at a fire scene or a car accident or an EMS scene. If you ever feel at any point like somebody is threatening your safety or your life, you need to get yourself out of there, make sure you and your crew are in a safe place, and notify law enforcement. That's not your job to deal with that. Get yourself to a safe area. Finally, the last question I chose is, how would you respond to finding drugs or alcohol in a fellow firefighter's, the lieutenant's, another officer's locker, in their belongings, something like that? This question is particularly tough because it plays on two different emotions. On one hand, you may not know the situation, so you don't want to be a snitch. You don't want to see something and immediately presume something that's not true and go tell on them. On the other hand, you want to do the right thing. You know that being intoxicated while on duty is not acceptable. You know that that puts everybody at risk. So figuring out exactly how to answer this question the right way can be pretty difficult. So the things you're going to want to keep in mind is, number one is safety's first. If you suspect that somebody's intoxicated, whether it be on drugs or alcohol or anything else, you need to notify an officer. That puts you, citizens, your entire crew, that puts everybody at risk. So your safety and the safety of your crew is the number one priority. So if you suspect somebody's intoxicated, you need to let them know. Second, respect. You may not know the situation. Maybe they have a serious addiction, or maybe it just looks like something, but it's not actually the case. You need to have respect for whoever your fellow crew member is, and not immediately go tell everybody about it, or immediately run and tell your superior officer. Maybe the best thing to do would be to approach them privately and say, hey, I noticed this, or hey, I found this. Is everything okay? Make sure that person's okay and treat them with respect. Finally, if for some reason that person refuses to get help or refuses to go home or something like that, follow the chain of command. If it's a fellow firefighter, let your lieutenant know. If it's a lieutenant, let the captain. If it's a captain, let your lieutenant and the chief know. Again, the chain of command is so important in the fire service, and you have to make sure that you follow it. So what are some common rookie mistakes that people make when answering the situational questions? Well, the first one is feeling like they need to do something immoral to cover for another firefighter. If you see somebody do something illegal or immoral, the first thing you should do is approach that person and let them know what you saw and tell them that you expect them to handle the situation appropriately. And if they don't, you need to report it. I get it where it can be kind of conflicting, that it might feel like you're being a snitch or not being a part of the group, but you need to do the right thing. Again, you have to hold yourself to a higher standard. The second one is safety is always the number one priority. You need to remember that, and you need to make sure you tell these officers that especially when you're on scene, whether it be an EMS scene, rescue scene, a fire scene, the safety is always the number one priority. And not letting the officers on the panel know that you understand that could be a huge mistake. Coming up in the next module, in Module 6, we're going to be going over ending the interview the right way. Now, asking the right questions and having a good closing statement is important, because you can go through this whole interview and have great answers, but if you give a terrible closing statement or say something stupid at the end, it can totally ruin your whole interview. Next, we're going to go over how to follow up the correct way. After you leave the interview, it might be a few weeks, it might even be a couple months until you hear from that department again. You need to know how to follow up the right way where you don't come off as annoying or obnoxious to the department. And finally, we'll touch on what happens if you don't get the job. Firefighting is a very, very competitive career, and sometimes you might just not get hired. That's okay. We'll touch on how to handle it and how to move on and prepare for the next interview coming up in Module 6.